Hey y'all, I'm done with my first week of chemoradiation and I have nothing to report. That's a good thing. The only side effect that I can really report on is an increased fatigue, and I can handle that. I did see my oncologist last Friday, and her main advice was to take better care of my feet, which I will do. I'll see my radiation oncologist on Monday. My oncologist says I'm where they expect I should be, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. I wish I had asked. The other thing she says is that I should use this time to enlighten and to educate and to be creative. She doesn't know that I have a YouTube channel, but this is a great platform for educating. You may never have cancer, I pray you don't, but chances are that you'll have someone in your family that does, or at least someone that's close to you that will be diagnosed. And I want to cover some of what goes through the patient's mind, what changes happen in your life, and so on. Obviously, I can only speak to my own experience. So I'm going to make a series of videos going through each step of this journey. The first video is called Prequel, or what happened in the time leading up to my diagnosis. How can you even have a prequel to a cancer diagnosis? Well, that's actually pretty easy. I'm betting many of us had symptoms that we were simply choosing to ignore. There are those of us, of course, that were completely blindsided, that had no idea that something was coming down the pike. As for myself, however, I had plenty of warning and a great propensity for imagining varying scenarios that had nothing to do with cancer. The big C, that's what I heard it called my whole life. The big C, cancer. Next to thermonuclear war, it's pretty much one of the scariest words you can even imagine. And we do live in such a great time with such promising treatments. And many of us will walk away with a full cure and, maybe a little body disfigurement. 50 years ago, though, many of these diagnoses were simply death sentences. Still, when you first hear the word cancer applied to your name, it feels like a death sentence. But we'll talk about more of that later. Men should start getting colonoscopies and prostate exams around the age of 50. This holds especially true if you have that sort of cancer that runs in your family. If you've not already figured it out by now, I am very private about my privates and about the goings-on down there. And I'll say it again, in 27 years of marriage, my wife has never seen me go to the bathroom, neither number one nor number two. The only time in my life, other than probably as a baby, that somebody's watched me pee was a security guard at a hospital I was a nurse at. Someone had been pilfering narcotics out of the drug system, and everyone had to pee, observed, in a cup. I managed to get through that, but it was terrible. I had to wait till my bladder was ready to burst. Now, having said that, let me warn you about a few things ahead of time. I do have a nurse's sense of humor. It's one of the ways we survive. On top of that, I was an emergency room nurse for much of my nursing life, so it can be pretty morbid at times. I can have an in-your-face way of stating certain things. For example, I might be using the word ass here and there, and perhaps the more polite way to say it would be bottom or rear end. That really sounds just a little bit juvenile. The official terms, the medical terms I could use are anus and rectum or rectal vault, but those actually sound more embarrassing to me than ass. Did you hear about Bob's rectum? Rectum, hell, it destroyed him. Now, I have to admit I've been dying to tell that joke, and I was going to do it even if it killed me. And as far as anuses go, anuses, what happens in Los Anus should stay in Los Anus. So that last is an example of the morbid humor, but it is humor, and we have to find it in our circumstance. Now, back to the prequel. So the long and the short of it is I didn't want anyone's finger doing the roto-rooter in my behind. And the easiest way to avoid this is that you just don't go to a provider. In this case, it really wouldn't have mattered because my prostate, while mildly enlarged, is otherwise normal, and the PSA or prostate specific antigen tests I've had in the last couple of years have all been in the normal range. I let that little fact help to support my boycotting of having a tube inserted into my ass. It's one thing to have your provider playing tic-tac-toe on your prostate, but it's another to be unconscious in a room full of people while a GI specialist goes hunting for the Titanic. I hate to not be in control. I hate it. And a colonoscopy is a really great example of not being in control. Ironically, it all ended up with me losing a lot of control over my life. And it's funny how that works, isn't it? I had noticed changes in my bowel movements over the last year, and I tried to write that off to a medication I was taking for my diabetes. And it is true that the side effects of this one medicine were mostly GI symptoms, so I ran with that. My provider, every time I saw her, did try to set me up for a colonoscopy, but each time I sidestepped. Now, sooner or later, I'll show you pictures from my colonoscopy, and when you see those masses, you can quickly deduce that they were given ample time to become the nasties that they became, and that I surely could have saved myself a lot of heartache if I just gotten a colonoscopy 3 years earlier. Let that be a lesson that you can take. Now, denial runs strong. My bowels would run haywire, and I would worry about it, but then they would become mostly normal. Towards the end of all of this, I started to have long periods of constipation, 3, 4, 5 days, followed by a day of raging diarrhea, and that would clean me out, and I would feel good again, and then we'd start that cycle all over again. Now, in my mind, I have a very advanced healing ability, and I figured when the good days happened, where I wasn't having symptoms, that I was healing whatever it was that was going on. I certainly didn't dare to think of the C word, but it was lurking in the shadows like a thief in the night. In the last week or so of this prequel, I started to dump large amounts of blood. I did this for several days, and I have no idea what was going through my head, but the C word did start to become more and more to the forefront of my brain. I would have continued to fight my way through, but my right lower leg ballooned up huge. I came home from work one day. I was exhausted, and I sat down in my wife's office. Now, she's been a nurse since 1984 and a cardiac nurse for most of those years. I had changed into my shorts, and I sat down, and she looked over at me. Her eyes got really big, and she immediately said, "What the heck is going on with your legs?" I had developed what's called pitting edema. It was really pretty bad. You could press in on my lower leg and leave an indentation that was about a ½ inch deep. It's caused by fluid leaking from your vessels into a third space. At this point, I could barely hold my headache. I could barely hold my head up. I was horribly dizzy, and I was horribly fatigued, and my first thoughts did not go to my bright red bleeding per rectum, which, by the way, is an actual diagnosis. They went to the possibility of either a blood clot in my right leg or a developing congestive heart failure. Both of those diagnoses would help to explain the symptoms I was having. I was off work the next morning, so I went ahead and went in and got my co-provider to order a chest x-ray, an EKG, and some lab work. I somehow failed to mention to her the problems with my bowels. Even at this point, I was too private to talk about it. The chest x-ray looked fine, and hallelujah, I smoked for 29 years before I quit, so it's always good to have a good chest x-ray. The EKG looked fine. There was no signs of heart failure on it. My labs, however, were completely screwed up. She brought me a copy of my labs and said, "Your hemoglobin is really low. That's why you feel the way you do." Now, quickly, hemoglobin carries your oxygen. My hemoglobin was less than half of what it normally is. For me, it was in a danger zone. It was 7.4. In addition, my ferritin, which is the circulating storehouse of your iron that you need for your hemoglobin, was depleted. So in your bloodstream, there's ferritin, and it's just a supply of iron that your body can use to help replenish your hemoglobin. Mine was depleted. My body had used most of it up in an attempt to mend the ramparts. My albumin was also very low, and that was probably the actual explanation for why my legs were swelling up. Now that's all a very simplistic explanation, but it'll do. Well, BS time was over. I asked my co-provider to come into my office and I shut the door. I told her about the bright red bleeding per rectum. She didn't seem surprised. And the other things that had been going on. So when push came to shove, it's actually very easy to get out. When you suddenly understand that you face the facts and start on recovery, or you continue to ignore them and die, the hesitance to talk about these things kind of fades away. So my coworker quickly got on the phone with one of our hospitalists, arranged for a direct admit. With the hated virus that's going around, which interestingly enough also starts with a C, and with it being a very busy time of the year anyway, there was a 30-bed waiting list to get admitted to the hospital. Now that I was willing to face the music, I wanted the orchestra to start playing right there and then. However, sick as I was, the other 30 people were also very sick, so I had to go home and wait for enough people to be discharged that I could get a bed in the hospital. And luckily, that really only took a few hours. So let's stop it right there for now. Like I said, cancer may not affect you directly yet. It may not even affect your friends, but sooner or later, it will. I hope these glimpses into my journey give you some understanding of what we go through. In the upcoming episodes, we'll talk about the experience in the hospital, getting the diagnosis, the stages of grief, just dealing with the whole thing. And I hope it helps some people to understand. I'm always willing to answer any questions that you have. As always, thanks for the view. Please consider sharing. I want this word to get around. I want people to be able to find this channel, people who are going through this, so we can share our experiences and be supportive of each other. I'd love to figure out how to hashtag this or whatever it is so people can find it more easily. And please hit the like button if you liked it. Guys, I love you and thank you very much.